A polished white executive slid a rejection letter across a mahogany desk toward a quiet black girl. She picked it up, read it, set it down, said nothing, smiled faintly. The letter was still sitting there when Victoria Langford straightened the papers on her side of the desk. She did it slowly, deliberately, the way people do when they want to appear calm and in control, when they want the silence to feel like closure rather than cruelty. Her blazer was perfectly pressed. Her expression was warm in the way that expensive training can make a person's face look warm, even when nothing behind it is. Aaliyah Carter was 17 years old, and she was sitting in the most beautiful office she had ever been in. And she was being told in the most professional language imaginable that she did not belong here. Aaliyah is clearly talented, Victoria said, but we don't believe Ashford is the right fit for her. The words landed in the room like something heavy dropped on carpet. You could feel the impact without hearing the sound. Denise Carter's jaw tightened, just slightly. Her hands folded in her lap, over the handle of her purse went white at the knuckles for just a moment. Those hands had held a violin steady through 12-hour overnight shifts. Those hands had signed permission slips on the back of grocery receipts because there was no other paper nearby. Those hands knew how to hold things together. They were doing that now. Aaliyah didn't flinch. She looked at Victoria for exactly 3 seconds, not defiantly, not with anger or pleading or any of the emotions that were probably expected from a 17-year-old girl hearing no. She just looked at her the way a person looks at something they are trying to understand completely before deciding what to do with it. Then she looked out the window. Below, the Ashford Academy campus stretched out in perfect order. Manicured grounds, stone pathways, a clock tower that had been photographed for every brochure the school had ever printed. Students moved between buildings in small clusters, unhurried, comfortable belonging to all of it in a way that nobody in this room had needed to explain to them. The Ashford crest hung on the wall behind Richard Whitmore's desk, large enough to be the first thing anyone noticed when they walked in. Excellence, character, tradition. 3 words in gold on dark wood. Whitmore himself had not spoken since Denise and Aaliyah had sat down. He was 61 years old, and he had silver hair and the kind of stillness that comes from spending decades in rooms where your silence alone carries authority. He sat with his hands resting on the closed folder in front of him, the folder that contained everything Aaliyah had submitted, and he watched the exchange the way a man watches a weather report for a city he will never visit. Denise asked her question carefully. "Can you tell us specifically what that means?" Not a good fit. Victoria's expression didn't shift. "We look for students who will thrive within our particular community culture. We believe Aaliyah would be better served by an environment more suited to her strengths." Denise kept her voice level. "She has the grades, she has the scores, she has the project awards." "Absolutely," Victoria said. "And those are wonderful accomplishments." A pause precisely timed. This wasn't an easy decision. Another pause, longer. Then Whitmore spoke for the first and only time. "We wish her every success." He stood. The chair barely made a sound. The meeting was over. Aaliyah stood too. She reached down for her bag from the floor beside her chair, and as she lifted it, the research binder slipped from the side pocket and fell landing flat on the polished floor between her chair and the desk, with a sound that was louder than anyone expected. She bent and picked it up calmly, tucked it back under her arm. Whitmore glanced at it. Just once. The way a person glances at something they have already decided is not their concern. Then he looked away and moved toward the door, and Victoria was already making a small gesture toward the exit professional and final, and that was it. That was the whole thing. In the hallway outside the admissions suite, the marble floor went on for a long way, and there were framed photographs of graduating classes stretching back decades lining the walls on both sides. Class after class after class, all those faces arranged in neat rows, all of them belonging here, in the way the students outside the window belonged here, in the way no one inside that room had thought to ask whether Aaliyah Carter could belong here too. Denise walked beside her daughter and did not speak. Aaliyah reached over and squeezed her mother's hand once. A single quiet press of her fingers, and then she let go. She didn't say anything. She didn't look at her mother's face. She just did the small thing, the steady thing, the thing she had been doing for years, and they kept walking. At the far end of the hallway, a boy passed them going the other direction. 17 prep school neat earbuds and not looking up from his phone. He didn't notice them, or if he did, they didn't register. Just two people leaving. The heavy front doors opened to the outside, and the air hit them different from the air inside, warmer, less controlled, and they walked out into the parking lot without looking back. Near the main entrance, a black sedan was idling at the curb. The man in the back seat was 55 years old, with wire-rimmed glasses and a folder of notes open across his knees. He was reviewing his remarks for the afternoon symposium keynote, something about emerging research in biomedical engineering, and he was not looking at anything in particular. Then he looked up at the exact moment Aaliyah and her mother crossed toward their car. He looked at them the way a person looks when something at the edge of their vision catches their attention without warning, and they do not yet know why. He didn't know their names. He didn't know what had just happened inside that building. He was about to find out. Black stories like this one have been told in whispers for generations. Dismissed talent, overlooked potential, doors that were opened for some and quietly held shut for others without anyone ever raising their voice. These aren't fictional stories. These are real-life stories. This is one of them. 1. Aaliyah Carter walked out of Ashford Academy that morning, carrying a 3-pound research binder and a prototype she had built from salvaged parts in her mother's garage. She didn't know what was about to happen next, but she was about to be seen, just not by anyone inside that building. The sedan door opened and Dr. Marcus Bennett stepped out with his folder tucked under one arm and his phone in the other hand, and he was already moving toward the entrance before his driver had fully stopped. He was the kind of man who was always slightly ahead of himself, always thinking 3 exchanges into a conversation before it started, always reading something, always moving. He had a keynote in 2 hours and 17 slides he still wasn't satisfied with, and a graduate student who had sent him 4 unanswered emails since Tuesday. He almost walked straight past them. Denise was loading the last of their things into the back of the Honda Civic, a 2017 model, in dark gray, clean and well kept, in the way that people keep things when they cannot afford to replace them. Aaliyah had the back door open and was sliding the research binder carefully onto the seat, positioning it flat, making sure nothing bent. Beside it on the seat, nestled in a padded black case with foam cutouts she had shaped herself, was the prototype. Bennett's feet slowed before his brain told them to. He looked at the case. At the visible edge of the device inside it, the compact housing, the sensor ports along the side, the clean routing of the internal wiring visible through the partially unzipped top. It was too precise for a hobbyist build, too considered for something pulled from a kit. He had spent 30 years in biomedical engineering labs, and he recognized the logic of the construction even from 10 feet away. He stopped. He looked at Aaliyah, then back at the device, then at Aaliyah again. "Excuse me," he said. "Is that a biosensor array?" Aaliyah turned. She looked at him the same way she had looked at Victoria Langford 40 minutes earlier, steady and assessing, taking in the glasses, the folder, the visitor badge clipped to his jacket that read Harvard University in small navy letters. Modified SPO2 architecture, she said. "But yes." Bennett lowered his folder. "What's it for?" He asked it the way an engineer asks, not politely curious, but genuinely wanting to know, wanting the actual answer, not the summary. Aaliyah looked at him for one more second. Then she told him, "To understand what that conversation meant, you have to understand what the 14 months before it had looked like." Denise Carter worked the overnight shift at Boston Medical Center 3 to 4 nights a week and had for 11 years. On the nights she didn't work, she picked up per diem shifts at a nursing facility in Dorchester when they called her, which was often because she was reliable and she never said no. She had a worn-out pair of nursing shoes she replaced every 8 months, and a commuter rail pass she paid for monthly, and a kitchen table where she paid every bill the same day it arrived, because being late cost money she did not have. The application fee for Ashford Academy was $450. She had started saving it 14 months before the deadline. She kept the money in a separate account she had named in the app on her phone, simply Aaliyah School. She put in $20 when she could $50 when a shift bonus came through nothing some weeks and double the next. It took 14 months. There was also the campus visit fee, $80, which she had not known about until the invitation arrived. She paid it. There were application prep materials. Aaliyah wanted practice interview guides, a research portfolio folder that looked professional, a printer ink cartridge to print the final documents cleanly. She paid those too. And there was the interview outfit, a simple blazer and slacks Aaliyah had picked out herself, from an online sale, nothing expensive, just right. The kind of thing that says I am serious without saying anything else. Aaliyah had spent 4 months preparing the research portfolio for that interview. She had rehearsed her answers out loud in the garage workshop, talking to the wall, adjusting her phrasing, taking out jargon she thought might lose a non-technical audience, putting it back in when she decided she was underestimating them. She had practiced explaining the project in 2 minutes, in 5 minutes, in 10. She had a version for everything. In the actual interview, Whitmore had asked her 2 questions about the project. 2. He had spent the remaining time discussing Ashford's community culture, its traditions, its particular kind of student environment, the way the school valued certain qualities of character and presence and belonging. He had not asked her a single question about her grades, her competition results, or the 2 years of independent research sitting in the binder she had placed on the edge of his desk. Victoria Langford had smiled warmly the entire time. It was a specific kind of smile, professional and kind, and completely sealed the smile of someone who had already decided and was simply waiting for the conversation to finish. The committee's internal notes, the ones that would eventually surface during an investigation, none of them were thinking about, yet would describe Aaliyah with 4 words. Doesn't reflect our student community profile, not her GPA, not her test scores, not the statewide STEM awards or the 2 years of original research. Just those 4 words written in the margin of her file like a quiet erasure. $450, 14 months, 4 words. Back in the parking lot, Dr. Bennett had the binder open. Aaliyah had hesitated when he asked to see it, just one beat the instinctive pause of someone who has learned not to hand things over to people who haven't earned the right to hold them. Then she handed it over. He scanned the first 3 pages, stopped, turned back to the first page, read it again from the top. How long did this take you? He said. 2 years, Aaliyah said. About 14 months of actual development. The rest was reading and failing. Bennett looked up from the binder and looked at Denise, who had stopped moving and was standing very still near the trunk of the car. Is she a current student here? He said. Denise took a breath. No, she said. She applied. They said she wasn't a good fit. Bennett was quiet. He looked back down at the binder. Did they review this? She brought it to the interview, Denise said. The parking lot was ordinary around them. A few parents arriving with symposium lanyards, a facilities worker moving a dolly of equipment through a side entrance, a car pulling slowly through the lot looking for a space. Everything normal, everything continuing. Bennett stood with the binder in his hands and read for another minute without speaking. Something was moving behind his expression. Not outrage, not performance, something quieter and more deliberate. The expression of a person who is recalibrating, who is taking in new information and revising what they thought they knew about a situation. He closed the binder carefully, handed it back to Aaliyah. I'd like to give you my card, he said. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a business card, white with a dark crimson logo, and held it out. Aaliyah took it, looked at it. Harvard University, Department of Biomedical Engineering, Dr. Marcus Bennett. For the first time since walking out of that building, Aaliyah Carter looked at something and let herself feel the smallest, most careful thing. Not hope exactly. Something more controlled than hope. Something that asked a question without yet daring to answer it. Interest. She held the card the whole way to the car, and then she put it in the front pocket of her backpack carefully, the way you put something when you don't want to think too hard about what it means yet. Denise started the engine without saying anything. She pulled out of the Ashford parking lot and onto the main road, and she drove with both hands on the wheel, 10 and 2, the way she always drove when something was sitting heavy on her mind. It was a habit from nursing, from years of keeping her hands steady when everything else felt like it was coming apart. The city changed outside the windows as they drove. Ashford's neighborhood gave way slowly, the wide lots and stone walls and old trees arching over the road, thinning out into something more familiar, more practical. Gas stations, a laundromat, a dollar store with a handwritten sign in the window, a barber shop Aaliyah had been passing her whole life. By the time they crossed into Roxbury, the streets looked the way they always looked, and the Honda Civic fit into them the way it always did, and none of it felt like defeat until Denise finally spoke. We'll find something else, Denise said. There are other schools, I know, Aaliyah said. A few blocks past, Mom, Aaliyah said. I'm okay. Denise kept her eyes on the road. I know you are, she said. Her voice held for most of those 4 words, not all of them. The last one went somewhere it wasn't supposed to go, just slightly, just enough. I'm the one who's not, she said. Aaliyah turned and looked at her mother's profile, the set of her jaw, the careful way she was holding herself together from the outside in. Aaliyah reached over and put her hand on her mother's arm, just rested it there, and Denise took a slow breath in through her nose and blinked once and kept driving. They didn't say anything else for the rest of the ride home. That evening, Aaliyah didn't sit in her room. She didn't put on music or scroll her phone or do any of the things people do when they are trying to avoid the feeling that is sitting in the middle of their chest. She went to the garage. The garage behind their house had been a storage space once, back when her father was alive, and there was a second car. Now it was hers. She had claimed it gradually over 3 years, moving the old boxes to one side, bringing in a folding table from a neighbor's curbside, adding shelves made from wood planks and stacked cinder blocks. The shelving held components in labeled plastic bins, salvage processors she had pulled from electronics recycling events at the public library, a used oscilloscope she had found on Craigslist for $40, and spent 2 weekends learning to calibrate spools of wire, a soldering iron in a rubber holder, a multimeter she had dropped twice and repaired both times. The walls were covered in her handwriting, not posters, not pictures, notes. 3 years of notes in black marker and blue pen on sheets of printer paper, tacked up in rough columns, data points and questions and crossed out hypotheses and small diagrams she had redrawn 4 and 5 times until they said what she needed them to say. It looked chaotic from the door. Up close, it had its own order, a map of how a mind works when it is trying to solve something that matters. She sat down at the folding table and powered up the prototype. The display flickered on, ran its startup check, settled into its standby readout. She watched it for a moment. Then she opened her laptop and pulled up the research document she had read more times than she could count. Not because she needed to check anything, just because reading it was what she did when she needed to feel like the work was still real. On the wall above the laptop, tacked between 2 columns of notes, there was a photograph. It was printed on regular paper, not photo paper, the colors slightly washed out from a home printer with low ink. Aaliyah was maybe 12 in the photograph, standing beside her father, in front of an open computer tower on the kitchen table. They were both looking at the camera and both smiling, her father's hand on her shoulder, the computer's innards exposed between them, the motherboard and the cables, and all the small components laid out like something they had discovered together. Her father's name was James Carter. He had been 38 years old. He had died on a Tuesday morning in October from a sudden severe asthma attack. He had been at work at a warehouse in South Boston, where he drove a forklift, and by the time the paramedics arrived, it was already too late. The hospital told Denise there had been no warning, no preceding symptoms significant enough to act on, no window to intervene. Aaliyah had been 9 years old. She had sat in the hospital waiting room for 4 hours before anyone told her anything. She had never fully accepted that there was no warning. She did not believe the warning wasn't there. She believed no one had been looking for it. That was what the project was. Not a science fair entry, not a competition piece, though it had won competitions. Not something she had built to impress an admissions committee, though she had brought it to one today, and watched a man glance at it and look away. It was what happened when a 9-year-old girl decided she was going to find the warning her father's doctors said didn't exist, and then spent 8 years figuring out how. She sat in the garage for 2 hours that night, not working on anything new, just being near the work. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes you just needed to sit in the room where the thing you built was and let it remind you that it was real and it was yours, and no one's decision about you could reach in here and change that. Inside the house, Denise sat at the kitchen table in her scrubs with her laptop open. The bank account balance on the screen said $214. She stared at it for a while. The application cycle for Ashford, the fee and the prep costs, and the visit and the outfit had taken the cushion she had spent months building back up. She was not in trouble. She was just back to where she had been, before she started saving, which felt like its own specific kind of quiet. She closed the laptop. Dr. Bennett's business card was on the counter where Aaliyah had left it when they got home. Denise picked it up, read it. Harvard University Department of Biomedical Engineering, Dr. Marcus Bennett, and a phone number, and an email address in small, clean type. She set it back down. She did not let herself think too far past the card. She knew what it felt like to hope for something, and then spend months adjusting to not having it. And she did not have the energy for that, right now, not tonight. Not with $214 in the account, and a night shift starting in 40 minutes. She tucked the card under the edge of the fruit bowl on the counter. The ceramic bowl her mother had given her years ago pressed it flat, so it wouldn't slip and fall behind something. So, it wouldn't get lost. She grabbed her bag, turned off the kitchen light, pulled the door shut quietly so Aaliyah could sleep. In a hotel room 4 miles away, Dr. Marcus Bennett had his reading glasses on, and 15 photocopied pages from Aaliyah's research binder spread across the bedspread in front of him. He had asked her in the parking lot if she could spare copies of a few key pages. She had looked at him for one measured second, and then gone to the back seat and taken the binder out, and walked with him to the business center inside the symposium building, and stood at the copier while he chose which pages. Now he was reading them the way he read things that surprised him, slowly going back, reading again. He picked up his phone and called a colleague. When the line connected, he didn't say hello. "I need you to look at something," he said. "No, not tomorrow. Tonight. I'm going to photograph these pages and send them over." He waited while his colleague responded. Then he said, "I know. That's exactly what I said." He hung up, sat on the edge of the bed, looked at the pages spread out in front of him, the neat handwriting, the diagrams, the validation tables, the methodology section that read like something written by a doctoral candidate, not a 17-year-old in a Roxbury garage. "She's 17, he said quietly to no one. By midnight, he had emailed photographs of 15 pages of Aaliyah's research to 3 colleagues, including Dr. Eleanor Hayes Dean of undergraduate admissions at Harvard University. He included a single line. "This was rejected by Ashford Academy today." Read it. Dr. Eleanor Hayes received the email at 11:47 at night. She was in her home office in Cambridge, still at her desk, because she was almost always still at her desk at that hour, and she had already read through 2 application files and a draft proposal for a curriculum revision when the notification came in from Marcus Bennett. She almost left it for morning. She opened it instead. The subject line said, "Only read this tonight." She opened the attachments, 15 photographs of handwritten and typed pages, slightly angled from being shot on a phone, but clear enough. She zoomed in on the first page, read the abstract, scrolled to the methodology section, and zoomed in further. She read for 11 minutes without moving. Then she picked up her phone and called Bennett. "Marcus?" she said, when he answered. "Where did you say you found this?" He told her the whole story. The symposium at Ashford Academy, the parking lot, the sedan, the girl loading things into a Honda Civic, the device in the padded case that stopped him mid-stride, the binder, the conversation, the rejection. "How old is she?" Hayes said. 17, Bennett said. "Senior year. She lives in Roxbury." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "Is the prototype functional?" "From what she showed me, yes," Bennett said. "We'd need to test it properly. But, Eleanor, the architecture is sound. This isn't a high school science project. This is publishable research. I sent you the methodology section. Look at the validation framework. She designed that herself." Hayes looked at the page still open on her screen. She had spent 23 years in academic admissions, and before that, a decade in research, and she knew the difference between work that looked impressive and work that was. This was the second kind. "Get me her contact information," she said. To understand what Hayes was looking at, you have to understand what Aaliyah had actually built. The system tracked 6 biomarkers simultaneously through a wearable sensor array: oxygen saturation, respiratory rate, heart rate, variability, skin, conductance, body temperature, and a motion pattern algorithm. Aaliyah had designed herself from scratch based on subtle involuntary movement changes that precede respiratory distress. The 6 data streams fed into an AI model she had trained over 18 months, using 3 years of publicly available pediatric asthma data sets. Cross-referenced against published clinical literature she had accessed through a free university library portal. The model's purpose was to predict a dangerous asthma episode before visible symptoms appeared, not during, before. The validation metric showed a prediction window of up to 45 minutes, with an accuracy rate above 91% across the test data. For context, the early warning systems currently in use at most pediatric hospitals operated somewhere between 70 and 78% accuracy. For a condition that kills nearly 2,000 Americans every year, most of them children and young adults, that gap between 75 and 91% was not a statistic. It was a margin measured in lives. She had built it in a one-car garage in Roxbury using salvage processors and a $40 oscilloscope and a laptop that took 4 minutes to boot up. She had done it while maintaining a 3.97 grade point average and working 12 hours a week at a pharmacy on Blue Hill Avenue where she knew most of the customers by name. Ashford Academy's admissions committee had this research sitting on the desk in front of them during her interview. They had looked at the binder. They had heard her name. They had made their decision. Their decision was that she didn't fit. 2 mornings after the rejection, Aaliyah was at the kitchen table eating cereal when her phone rang. It was just after 8, an unknown Boston number, no name, just 10 digits. She looked at it for 2 rings, almost let it go to voicemail. Then she answered. Dr. Bennett identified himself. He asked if she had a few minutes. Denise was standing at the counter, still in her scrubs from the overnight shift, her coat not yet taken off, a glass of water in her hand. She hadn't slept. Aaliyah looked at her, and then put the call on speaker and set the phone on the table between them. Bennett's voice came through clearly in the quiet kitchen. He said that colleagues had reviewed the research pages he had shared with them. He said that Dr. Eleanor Hayes, the dean of undergraduate admissions at Harvard University, had read through the binder materials and wanted to follow up directly. He said Harvard would like to arrange a formal meeting, not an admissions interview. He was specific about that distinction, but a research presentation. We'd want to see the prototype demonstrated if possible, he said. And we'd want to talk about what a path at Harvard might look like for you. The kitchen was very quiet. Denise set her water glass down on the counter without looking at it. Her hands came up slowly and pressed over her mouth. Aaliyah kept her eyes on the phone. When she said, "Whenever works for you," Bennett said. "We're flexible." Aaliyah looked at her mother's back. Denise had turned toward the window, both hands still over her mouth, her shoulders moving in the small, careful way of someone crying without making sound, not wanting to interrupt, not wanting to make it about herself, shaking silently in her overnight scrubs in the morning light coming through the kitchen window. "Friday works," Aaliyah said. 3 days later, they drove to Cambridge in the Honda Civic, and Aaliyah carried the prototype in its padded case and the research binder under her arm. And they found the engineering building, and Denise found a seat in the corner of the conference room and folded her hands in her lap and did not say a word. Aaliyah set up the prototype on the conference table, connected her laptop, arranged her materials. Then she stood at the head of the table and looked at the 4 people seated across from her, Dr. Bennett, Dr. Hayes, and 2 faculty members whose names she had looked up the night before, and she began. She presented for 47 minutes. No notes, no filler, no apologies for technical language, and no over-explaining for the sake of appearing accessible. She knew the work, and she spoke about it the way you speak about something you have lived inside for 2 years, directly, specifically, without performance. At the 22-minute mark, one of the faculty members, a woman with close-cropped gray hair, who had been taking notes steadily since the start, stopped writing. She set her pen down. She just watched. At the 40-minute mark, Dr. Hayes leaned forward and asked a question about the model's handling of edge cases in patients with comorbid conditions. It was not a gentle question. It was the kind of question you ask when you want to find the boundary of someone's understanding. Aaliyah answered it, completely, and then she said, "I've been thinking about that limitation. I ran 3 alternate validation approaches to stress test it. Do you want to see those?" Hayes looked at Bennett. Something passed between them, brief and certain, the look of 2 people who have just had the same thought at the same time and don't need to say it out loud. When Aaliyah finished, there was a silence of a few seconds. The kind of silence that isn't emptiness, but wait. Aaliyah, Dr. Hayes said, "Can you give us a few minutes?" Aaliyah and Denise stepped out into the hallway, and the door closed behind them. The hallway was long and bright and smelled like old paper and floor wax, and Denise gripped her daughter's arm with both hands. "You were incredible," she said. Aaliyah looked at the closed door. "I was just honest," she said. Inside that room, Dr. Hayes had already opened a new document on her laptop and was typing the first lines of a proposal. It would go through 3 drafts and 2 committee reviews over the following 10 days. When it was finalized, it would carry the name Harvard Emerging Innovators, scholarship full tuition room board, and a funded research position in the biomedical engineering department. The scholarship had never existed before. They were building it from nothing. They were building it for her. 10 days after Aaliyah and Denise drove home from Cambridge Harvard University, published a press release on its official channels. It went out on a Tuesday morning first to the university's alumni newsletter, then to its social media accounts, then through the standard wire distribution that education journalists monitor as a matter of routine. The release announced the creation of the Harvard Emerging Innovators Scholarship, a new award established to recognize extraordinary young researchers whose work demonstrates exceptional potential and whose pathways to higher education may not have followed conventional routes. The inaugural recipient was Aaliyah Carter, 17, of Roxbury, Massachusetts. The release described her project in 2 careful paragraphs, enough detail to make clear that this was not a typical student achievement, that she had built a wearable AI system designed to predict pediatric asthma attacks up to 45 minutes. Before visible symptoms appeared, that she had done it independently, that the preliminary validation metrics were being reviewed by faculty in the biomedical engineering department. The scholarship covered full tuition room board and included a funded research position. The release included one quote from Dr. Eleanor Hayes. "We created this scholarship because extraordinary talent sometimes arrives through doors that weren't built to recognize it." Ashford Academy was not mentioned anywhere in the release. It did not need to be. Victoria Langford knocked on Richard Whitmore's office door at 8:43 that same morning. She came in without waiting for an answer, which she had never done before, and she set a printed copy of the press release on his desk and stepped back and said nothing. Whitmore read it. He read it the way a person reads something they are hoping will say something different than it says, going slowly checking each line. The name, the project, the description of the device. The binder he had watched slip from a bag and land on his office floor 8 days ago. "She applied here," he said. "She interviewed here," Victoria said. 8 days ago. Whitmore set the paper down. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that the sounds of the building came in to fill the silence, a door somewhere down the hall, a phone ringing twice and stopping. "Have we heard from anyone?" he said. "Not yet," Victoria said. She paused. "But Ethan Montgomery posted something this morning." Ethan Montgomery had posted from his personal account at 7:15 that morning, before first period, sitting in the Ashford student parking lot in his car. The post was not long. It said that Ashford had told a girl applying that year she wasn't a good fit, and that Harvard had just given her a scholarship they had created specifically for her. It said he had happened to overhear part of the admissions discussion when he was waiting outside the office, and that the word fit had come up a lot. It said her grades and her project were not the issue. It ended with 4 words. "Ask yourselves what actually was." He posted it, and then sat in his car for a minute, and then got out and went to class. By 11 that morning, the post had 4,000 shares. It moved the way things move when they land on the exact pressure point that people have been waiting for something to land on. An alumni parent in the comments connected the name Aaliyah Carter to Ashford Academy within the first hour. And after that, the school's name was in every repost and reply thread, and the connection was solid and public and not going away. By early afternoon, Ashford Academy was appearing in trending searches. By evening, the phrase "not a good fit" was appearing in headlines and comment sections and Twitter threads as a piece of cultural shorthand that everyone immediately understood. A journalist at the Boston Globe who covered education pulled up Victoria Langford's public LinkedIn profile and took a screenshot of her title, Director of Enrollment, Ashford Academy. Someone else found the school's diversity and inclusion page, the one with the banner image of smiling students, and the statement about Ashford's commitment to welcoming scholars from all backgrounds, and began screenshotting it alongside Ethan's post. The juxtaposition spread faster than either item had spread alone. Former students began posting. Not all of them, not a flood, but enough, a steady accumulation of short accounts from Black and Latino alumni, and applicants describing interviews where the conversation had drifted away from their qualifications and toward questions about how they would adjust to Ashford's environment, whether they had visited the campus before, and what their impression was, whether they felt they would be comfortable in a community like this one. Nobody used the word racist in their posts. They didn't need to. The pattern was visible without it. The hashtag, "not a good fit," began trending nationally by the second day. 2 days after the Harvard announcement, a Boston Globe reporter filed a story headlined, "Harvard Scholarship Created for Student Rejected by Elite Prep School." The piece ran the full timeline: the application, the interview, the rejection, the parking lot, Dr. Bennett, the presentation, the scholarship. Ashford's communications office had been contacted for comment and had declined to respond by deadline, which the Globe noted in the second paragraph. The story was picked up by national outlets within 18 hours. 3 cable news morning programs ran segments the following day. 2 of them played the Hayes quote on screen in large text. Extraordinary talent sometimes arrives through doors that weren't built to recognize it. One anchor read it twice. Victoria Langford's 4 words, "not a good fit," were dissected in real time by commentators who explained the long institutional history of that particular phrase, how it had functioned for decades in elite schools and selective organizations as a way to exclude without leaving evidence, how it was difficult to challenge precisely because it said nothing specific, how that vagueness was not a flaw in the language but its entire purpose. Margaret Sinclair convened an emergency board session on the 3rd day after the Harvard announcement. She was 67 years old, and she had chaired Ashford's board for 9 years. And she had managed difficult situations before donor disputes, faculty misconduct, a financial audit that had required careful navigation. She was not a person who panicked. But she walked into that boardroom and sat down and looked at the people around the table and opened with 3 words: "We have a problem." She went through the timeline without editorializing. The media coverage, the Globe story, the cable news segments, the social media reach. 3 major donors had already called the development office to ask questions, 2 of them using the word pause when describing their current pledge status. 2 directors of admissions at feeder middle schools had reached out to board members personally, not officially, just asking informally what was happening, which meant they were already talking to parents. Whitmore spoke. "The committee followed standard protocol," he said. "The girl was simply not the right match for our particular." Sinclair cut him off. "Richard," she said, "Harvard created a scholarship for her." She paused. "In 2 weeks." The room was quiet. Sinclair looked around the table. "I want an independent review of our last 3 years of admissions decisions," she said. "I want it authorized before we leave this room today. And I want our communications team reaching out to every major donor before they read something else, somewhere else." Victoria Langford was looking at the table in front of her. Whitmore nodded, slowly. The way a person nods when they understand that the conversation they thought they were managing has already moved somewhere beyond them. The investigation Sinclair ordered would take 11 weeks. What the investigators found in Ashford Academy's internal records would make the Harvard story look like the beginning. The independent report was delivered on a Thursday morning, in a room that felt smaller than it had 11 weeks earlier. Margaret Sinclair sat at the head of the boardroom table, with the bound report in front of her, and 2 attorneys on her left and 4 trustees on her right, and the chairs where Richard Whitmore and Victoria Langford used to sit were empty. Both of them had been placed on administrative leave 6 weeks into the investigation quietly without announcement, while the investigators continued their work. The lead investigator, a woman from a civil rights compliance firm in Washington who had conducted 14 similar reviews for educational institutions over the past decade, presented the findings without editorializing. She had the manner of someone who had learned long ago that the numbers spoke more clearly than any framing she could put around them. Over a 3-year period, Black applicants to Ashford Academy, with qualifying academic profiles, meaning GPAs and standardized test scores that met or exceeded the school's published admissions, benchmarks had been rejected at a rate 3.4 times higher than white applicants with comparable or lower scores. The investigators had reviewed 211 application files. The pattern was consistent across all 3 years reviewed. It did not fluctuate significantly by committee member or by application cycle. It was structural. The phrase cultural fit or community fit appeared in the rejection documentation for 23 out of 27 Black applicants whose files were reviewed. The same language appeared in 4 out of 41 rejection documents for white applicants. There was no formal rubric defining what fit meant. There was no scoring system, no written criteria, no consistent standard applied across cases. The word was used when committee members wanted to say no and did not want to say why. The investigators had also reviewed internal email communications among admissions committee members going back 38 months. They found several exchanges between Whitmore and two colleagues that referenced the importance of maintaining the school's historical character in the context of admissions decisions. One email from Whitmore, sent 18 months before Aaliyah's interview, read in its entirety, "We've managed the community profile carefully. Let's not undo that." The investigator read that sentence aloud once and then moved to the next finding. Sinclair listened to all of it without interrupting. When the presentation concluded, she thanked the investigators and asked the attorneys to stay, and dismissed everyone else. She sat at the table for a long time after the room emptied and looked at the cover page of the report and did not say anything to anyone. Whitmore's resignation was announced the following Monday. The statement was 4 sentences. He thanked the board for the opportunity to serve. He wished the school continued success. He said the decision to step down was his own. There was no apology anywhere in the 4 sentences, not a suggestion of one. Victoria Langford was formally terminated 3 days later. Her attorney had pushed for a non-disclosure agreement as part of the severance arrangement, a standard request in situations like this one, the kind of clause that makes things quieter and tidier for institutions that can afford the settlement. The board refused it. The refusal came after 2 civil rights advocacy organizations sent letters to Sinclair's office specifically requesting that no NDA be included in any separation agreement. The board's outside counsel reviewed the request and recommended compliance. The clause was removed. 3 organizations, the New England Civil Rights Coalition, a Boston-based education equity nonprofit, and a national advocacy group with offices in Washington, filed formal complaints with the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination. The complaints named Ashford Academy as an institution and outlined the pattern of differential treatment documented in the independent report. The MCAD had 90 days to make an initial determination on whether to investigate. Ashford's legal team began preparing a response the same afternoon the complaints were filed. The day Whitmore's resignation became public, a journalist pulled his quote from the rejection meeting and put it in a headline, "We wish her every success." The phrase had been reported in passing in earlier coverage attributed to an unnamed admissions official, but now it had a name attached to it and it spread differently. People posted it with the investigation findings alongside it. They posted it with the report's statistics. They posted it with Ethan Montgomery's original 4 words. Ask yourselves what actually was. A former Ashford faculty member gave an interview to The Atlantic the same week anonymously, their identity confirmed by the magazine's editorial standards, but not disclosed publicly. The faculty member said that the language of fit had been part of admissions committee culture for as long as they had been at the school. They said it was used most frequently and most consequentially when the applicant being discussed was a student of color. They said they had raised the issue internally once, years ago, and had been told that the committee had full discretion over the definition of institutional alignment. They had not raised it again. Aaliyah posted her video on a Tuesday evening from the garage workshop. She propped her phone against a stack of research binders, checked the frame once, and pressed record. She was wearing a gray hoodie. The shelving and the components and the notes on the wall were visible behind her. She had not told anyone she was going to post it. She thanked Dr. Bennett by name. She thanked Dr. Hayes and Harvard by name. She talked about the project for a moment, briefly just what it was and what she hoped it would eventually do. Then she mentioned her father. She said his name James, and she said that she had started this because of him, and that she hoped it would eventually help other families not go through what hers had gone through. She said it in 2 sentences, and then she moved on. She did not cry. She did not perform grief or gratitude. She was just honest the way she had told Dr. Hayes she was just honest, and it read exactly that way on screen. The last thing she said before she stopped the recording was, "I just wanted to build something that worked. I still do." She posted it and put her phone face down and went back to the work on her table. 2.3 million people watched the video in the first 48 hours. The clip of her saying her father's name was extracted and shared separately across platforms where it reached communities that might not have seen the full video: pediatric medicine forums, engineering networks, education advocacy groups, parenting communities. 3 medical device companies contacted Dr. Bennett within the week requesting introductions. He forwarded their messages to Aaliyah with a single line of his own, "Your call entirely." Denise came home from her overnight shift the morning after the video posted and sat at the kitchen table and watched it on her phone. She watched it all the way through without stopping. When Aaliyah said her father's name, Denise set the phone down flat on the table and looked at the fruit bowl on the counter. Dr. Bennett's business card was still tucked under the edge of it, right where she had placed it. The night of the rejection pressed flat so it wouldn't get lost. She had never moved it. She reached over and picked it up, held it in both hands, looked at the small crimson logo in the corner and the neat type and the name. Then she set it back down, exactly where it had been. She sat very still at the kitchen table for a long time, while the morning light came through the window and the house stayed quiet around her, and Aaliyah slept upstairs.